We are WNST. Towson, Baltimore. Baltimore positive. We are positively going to have some fun in this one. I'm doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by our friends at the Maryland Lottery. Going to be doing a whole bunch of stuff. I'm going to be at Costas on the 27th. Going to be celebrating my birthday as well as Luke's birthday, as well as Jim Palmer and Sammy Hagar's birthday on October the 11th at Pizza John's in Essex. Yes, they have a crab cake. No, they will not have oysters. I'm doing oysters every single day for our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions, 1-800-CLEAN water. They keep my well water clean. They can keep your well water clean. Also, our friends at Curio Wellness. I'm wearing my I'm a Blunt Person shirt just to make my friends giggle because they've known me a long, long time. Where to begin in this one? Back when I was a young man, my first gig was at a newspaper called the News American. My parents called it the News Post. And there was an opportunity that came my way, and I'm not going to go too far into my own story because it's documented. But I was a kid at the mall. There was a printer on the second floor who was the stepfather of a girl I went to school with and said he was going to get me a job at the newspaper. And I filled out a form in eighth grade, ninth grade to go to high school to be a journalist. I thought I was going to be Richie Cunningham. And I ran into this family at Christmas time, 1983, at the mall. And he had always promised to get me a gig back when I was like 12, and now I was like 14 or 15. And he said he was going to get me a gig. And then my phone rang, and there was a guy named Tom Robinson who called and said, hey, here you want to be a sports journalist. And I cleared my throat and I said, yes, I do, Mr. Robinson. And next thing you know, I'm on the number 10 bus with my dad in this old broken down newspaper at the corner of South and Lombard Street called the News American. There was an upstart little tabloid sports section called Sports First. This was a news. This is the August 1984 edition. This must have been when I had my first byline. I was 15 years old and 10 months when this was published. And this publication lasted 1 year and maybe a week or two. I'm going to let the adults in the room clear all of that up. But I have gathered anyone who would gather from the staff. It was really all brought on by the death of one of our colleagues, a guy named Rich Petro, whom we all loved, who fixed all the cameras, and we needed him today to make the Zoom cameras work, and he's not among us anymore. And there was a picture of a bunch of young men, I should say, and I can share this out into the Zoom right now for everybody to see. This was the crew at a newspaper called Sports First back in 1983 and 1984. Some of these good-looking folks have gathered here today to reunite. Rich Petro is the man on the far right in the upper corner who's sort of standing alone because he did stand alone right over the very famous John Stedman. I'd like to welcome in out of my crew of colleagues, and I was by far the youngest one there, but not too far, because some of you would say you were teenagers. I know Tom Robinson was, and he couldn't be with us here today. Some folks departed. Some folks went on to fame and infamy, including Barry Levine, Bernie Miklasz, Jeff Gordon in St. Louis, our fearless leader, Bob Paston, who went on to run the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. But gathered here today, some of my bosses, some of my editors, some of my mentors. One guy I dragged to my high school luncheon because I got credit in my senior year for working at the News American. I'd like to welcome in our one of my bosses at the time, Dave Smith, who is like the executioners were, just sort of a black mask because he can't figure out how to make his camera work, which is where we could have used Rich Petro right now. Chris Zhang is here, a longtime editor, a longtime community relations and PR and tall man, and the man who accompanied me on my 21st birthday and bought me my first legal drink at Hammerjack's. Legal drink. We were together that night. Gene Boyers is here, a great photographer, my friend who lives out in the desert, went on to Jersey and shot a lot of World Series, a lot of games, a lot of Yankees, a lot of Giants. And then Pete Kurtzel. Everybody's familiar with Pete. He no stranger to WNST over many years of Jimmy Buffett conversation, as well as real baseball. Gentlemen, how are you? 40 years, literally today, as we tape this on September 21st, 1984, that the Sports First shut down. The News American would say so long. So I have this. This is May 27th, 1986. So it was almost 2 years later. That this was the original. You remember Mr. Levitt pleading guilty there, and Memorial Day 1986. And then they went from this to So Long, Baltimore. I have both editions here from the News American. You guys, some of you were a part of that, and I guess Dave, let's lead off with you because you were with me at the Sun. You were sort of a big brother to me in the beginning, and I don't know how all of you gathered to even. I don't know the genesis of Bob Paston saying, "We're putting a newspaper together. We're going to hire some young people around here."
Yeah, well, I had a little bit of a head start at the News American because I was a college intern there. So I was on the phone taking agate from basketball games, and they sent me out to cover a few things. And when I was getting ready to graduate, that happened to be the time that Sports First was hiring people, and Bob Paston offered me a job, and I was going to start 2 weeks after college graduation. So I said, sounds good to me, and that's how I got started. And it was a great way to get into the business because I already knew so many of the people I would be working with. Z in particular. You say, Nestor, that you consider me somewhat of a mentor. Man, Z was my mentor. Z taught me the ropes. He was so kind and patient to put up with all of us young people trying to figure out how to edit stories. But that's one thing I remember about my year at Sports First was it was such a learning experience, and Chris Sang, man, he was right at the center of that. So I'll always remember that. But the other thing I want to say about Sports First in general, man, is uh, if we were only in existence for 1 year and 1 week, it was a hell of a year as far as news value in sports. The Orioles. First thing that happened was the Orioles won the World Series about a month after we went live, even less than a month after that. And we were targeted, we were marketed to the Baltimore, Washington area, not just Baltimore. So you have to include the Redskins going to the Super Bowl there. Um, and then a few months after that, the Colts packed up and went to Indianapolis. A couple months after that, Jim Palmer threw his last pitch for the Orioles, and then a couple months after that was the LA Olympics. So it was an incredibly newsworthy time in Baltimore sports, in particular Baltimore Washington sports. Also I have to throw in Maryland basketball winning the ACC tournament. It was Lefty Drizel's only ACC tournament title. So it was man, we were chock full of big events. So if we couldn't survive selling papers, to an audience there, I mean, I guess there was no hope for us. But the news certainly didn't hurt.
Zanger, you want to defend your own honor here? I always remember you in the newsroom. I was a kid, and then you followed me, and I followed you to the Evening Sun. We didn't have like the same deadlines at the Evening Sun. Like the Evening Sun, we were kind of like chilling out and whatnot, usually in the middle of the night, taking time to edit. There was enough time to get the job done. But I always remembered like you were always sort of like calm. You know what I mean? Calm in a circumstance where the newsroom was not always calm. So we needed calm. We needed big grown-ups like you, Zanger.
Well, maybe part of that was because my sidekick, Mike Marlowe, who was the designer, who unfortunately is on the road today and couldn't be with us. But we would be calm some nights because we'd be following you down Hammerjacks to check out whatever act was going on at the time, because the Evening Sun shift was we needed to be done like 7 in the morning. And obviously, it really didn't matter whether we were doing, well, there had to be page flow and all that good kind of stuff. But for the most part, as long as we're hitting our deadlines, if we decided to go out for an hour and accompany you to some local place where maybe somebody like Joan Jett or
Ginger Baker was the big night, as I remember. You guys were very turned on by Ginger Baker.
well, I was playing drums at the time, and I took a drumstick expecting Ginger to sign it for me, and he looked at me like I had three heads and told me that wasn't going to happen. So, anyway,
He was not nearly as friendly as some others were in the rock and roll space, for sure.
no, but extremely talented,
But
and how he, Jack Bruce, and Clapton put together Cream with three people is, well, them and the Hendrix experiences. But
sometimes
anyway,
I'd wonder how we put together a newspaper back in the day. And I take this everywhere I go and everything I do, the budget meetings and news value and what is news. And, you know, my status in the local media is sort of infamous at this point, 40 years later. But all of it was brought on by all of you taking a 15-year-old kid and saying, you know, you have to press people on issues. Behind all of this was the news and journalism, and we had fun. And I mean, it would have made a great sitcom, the whole thing. Gene, were you at the News American before Sports First? Do you have some history you can bring as to like how Hearst and they were trying to make a business out of this sports little paper in 1983, 84?
I came to the News American in July of 1970. So I had been there. And when I first started, a new guy in the photo department, well, you're going to work nights, which didn't bother me because it meant I got to go to the Orioles, I got to go to the Bullets, and that was fun. And I came in after been there about a year, and I came in one morning and my boss said to me, I need you to switch shifts. I said, what? He said, Andy Keene, our early guy, keeps oversleeping and they're going to fire him. I need you to switch to 6 to 2. That was 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. and do news and features. Sure. I'm 24 years old. I'm going to say no to the boss. I did that for 8 years. 79, when the Orioles made their World Series run, Paul White, who was then my boss, came to me in August and said, I need to take you off that early shift. I'm going to put you on the Orioles straight through as far as they go. And when that ended, he said, I'm just going to leave you at night and you'll shoot sports and we'll work a schedule out to whatever. And about 3 months after that, Richard Curtis, who was our graphics director, calls me in and says, hey, are you still just shooting sports? I said, yeah, I like it. He said, too bad, we need you to do other stuff too. And I got stuck doing this, doing that. And I complained to somebody out front about it. Oh, I know what happened. They put all the new kids doing sports, the Baltimore Blast, and they couldn't shoot indoor soccer. It was too dark. Paul got called on the carpet. He said, hey, you won't let me put Gene in where I can use him. So I got put back into sports. When everybody left to go to USA Today, they brought in a new photo director who said to me again, now you can't just do sports and you got to go on. And I complained about that. And I was told, be quiet. Something new is coming. As photographers, they didn't tell us anything. We just suddenly, about 6 weeks before the first issue came out, we were told, okay, you guys need to learn to process color transparency film. You're going to be shooting color 5 days a week on deadline. And it was like, all of a sudden we had all this new stuff we had to learn. And it was
So everything you shot was black and white prior to that.
Prior to that, yes. I think that
your film was black and white. Everything you shot in 1979 was a black and white picture.
There was one of the World Series, I guess it was the 79 World Series, where we did a color project for one game. But to do it on a daily basis was just, in those, today it's nothing because it's all digital.
Well, it took a special press, right? I mean, that's why this Sports First was never really printed in Baltimore, right? Like the press this thing was so ambitious to the News American in that old dumpy building that was decrepit then that presses that printed this kind of tabloid was a different kind of press, right?
It was printed, I think, in Gaithersburg because the
Yes.
first night we worked all day. The publication started on Monday because we had the Colts on Sunday. And I'm there. I shoot the Colts game. We come back. We process film. We edit. We get it all put together, and then we all have to drive to Gaithersburg to watch it come off.
I remember this story. There was somebody at the end of the shift charged with literally driving the plates for the newspaper to Gaithersburg and getting it there so it could be printed, right? Like literally,
Right.
Yep.
that's how
And
backwards
back
ass
to
this is, right?
Baltimore.
Like literally.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then
I did that once a week.
everybody went the first night. I think was Maurice Sparby still the publisher then?
Yes.
Yep.
And we're having champagne as the presses are running, and it was exciting. But I said to myself, as a business major, I don't see this model working. And the problem was they were trying to create something new, to create new advertising. And all they ended up doing was pulling advertising away from the daily paper because people
It
liked
cannibalized itself.
first.
Yes, sure.
They wanted to just buy ad space in the sports first paper, and management was saying, no, you got to buy it in both papers. So
I remember
think
News American, 7 lines, 7 days, $7. I remember the
yeah,
average on the classified
that
ad.
was classified. We're talking about display ads.
Sure, sure.
Unfortunately, I got to get out of here. My granddaughter is
Gene, I
single.
love you, man. Thanks for storytelling. I want to bring Pete in here anyway. Gene, I'll be following the pictures. Gene lives in the desert out in Vegas. I'm looking forward to your sphere pictures out there, man.
Okay, I'll see you guys soon.
Good to
Right.
see you, Gene.
Take it
Look
easy,
at that
Gene.
picture of Derek Jeter he's got behind him that he took.
Hey.
Look at you.
Learn your camera, baby. Pictures matter.
All right.
Visuals tell stories. Pete Kurtzel, I got to get you in here because I don't know your story. I know you're a Southwest Baltimore guy. I knew there were roots in this, and you and I really became friends in 1984 through hockey and being in the press box. And I know you wrote for like an Arbutus paper or something like that. What happened with you? You were probably stringing at the News American before Sports First, yes?
Yes. I got out of UMBC in 82, born and bred in Catonsville. Lived there until I moved to Ocean City 2.5 years ago, but got out of UMBC in 82 and went immediately to work at a Patuxent publishing paper down in Laurel, the Laurel Leader, and I was the sports editor in Laurel. And about the same time, Bernie Miklas was covering for the News American, both the Blast and the Skipjacks. And it was just running Bernie ragged. It's hard to cover either of those two teams, covering them both simultaneously, being on the road, it just doesn't work. And one night in the press box, Bernie said, "Hey, would you be willing to come in and talk to my boss and see if we can get you to cover some games?" I was all about that. I'd been doing a lot of freelancing in soccer and hockey, and
So you were in the hockey press box for Laurel Leader, right? And they were
I was
weekly?
I was in the hockey press box for anybody that would buy my stuff. The Harrisburg Patriot News with Steve Summers, the
So you
Bingham.
were stringing for the Utica
Yes.
paper or the
Yeah,
Richmond, whoever was in town.
exactly.
Okay, got it. All right.
And I
And
went
same
in.
thing with the Blast, right? Because the Blast didn't
Yes.
travel necessarily people from Tacoma or other places,
No.
right?
I mean, it was a lot easier for them to pay me $75, which, doesn't sound like a lot today. But think early 1980s, $75 was a pretty good deal for one night's work when it didn't even feel like it was a lot of work. So
And you were trying to build a resume. You're trying to get it. We all were. I mean, I think that way all the time. Like, I would have paid them to do it, to interview Paul Stanley.
Exactly. Well, I sat down with Bob Paston, and Bob was like, "I want to hire you." And I said, "There's only one problem." And he says, "Okay, tell me what the problem is." I said, "I'm working with this other paper that can't know I'm working for you." So that's why for my entire 2+ years at the News American and sometimes at Sports First, whenever they needed copy, I never got a byline. I was just special to the News American. And it made it a little tough.
Why didn't you become Kurt Pietzel or something like that? You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Take on a different name.
I asked about that because I had a pseudonym that I had written under,
What was it
and
going to be?
uh, what was it back then? Peter Toth, Thoth,
Okay.
and
Sounds like a porn star, just so you know. I'm just saying, but go ahead.
I actually
nixed
thought
that.
I actually thought when Happy Fine was writing at the News American, I could have sworn that was a pseudonym for something. But
That was
anyway.
really Happy's name.
Yes, yes.
He really was Happy Fine. And there's a whole story about him in the industry, but nonetheless, Pete, so you're
Sorry, Pete. Yeah.
I'm
you're
just
special to the News American.
Special to the News American. And I mean, look, for a 23, 24-year-old kid, this was like I had died and gone to heaven. They were sending me on road trips. I mean, I had been with the news for like 6 months, and Bob pulls me into the office and says, I want you to do a big feature, but can you get off for like 10 days? 10 days, sure. Where am I going? He says, you're going to go with the Skipjacks to the Canadian Maritimes, and we're going to send you up there for an entire Maritimes road trip. And it ended up being great because they clinched the title while I was with them on the road.
Oh, that was the 84 season when they played Sherbrooke, right?
Yes, yes.
Wow. So what did you do? Cape Breton and Fredericton?
Well, no, we did. Well, we started in Springfield, then Halifax, Moncton, and Sherbrooke.
Fair enough.
And then flew back out of.
Well, that's a hell of an experience for a 22-year-old kid from Catonsville, right?
I'm
Were you 22? How old were you?
I was about 24 at that point.
Okay. Oh, yeah. All right.
And I'm living the life now, but we got off to a really bad start on that trip because we're in Springfield.
Ubriaco's the coach, right?
Ubi's the coach,
Okay.
who I'm still in contact with every once in a while.
One of the great humans I've ever met in my life.
Oh, and just salt of the earth. Well, we're in Springfield, and Chris will remember these. Remember the old telex machines they gave us to go on the road with? Oh my God.
This is pre-Radio Shack?
This is pre-Radio Shack TRS 80 Model 100. Yes.
Trash 80.
The telex was useful and functional if there was no noise. If any of you have ever been in a sports arena after a game is over, there's rarely no noise. I'm sitting there trying to file my story, and you had to put the phone in the couplers on top of the thing. And that was fine unless anybody within about a 10-mile radius sneezed, coughed, or walked. I kept getting kicked off because they were literally breaking down the ice rink for a wrestling event the next afternoon.
Boom, boom, boom. Right,
Yes.
exactly.
Well, hour after the game, Ubi comes out on, and it was like a stage similar to what was at the Baltimore Civic Center. And he calls up and he's like, Scoop, the bus leaves in 10 minutes with you or without you. I got to file my story, and I can't get the story to go. I think I ended up dictating the story, or at least enough of it.
To somebody like me. There was somebody in the other end. That was usually me. Dave said answering the phones for Agate. That was my other job. Hey, Kurtzel can't file. I can hear Paston coming in. Kurtzel can't file. You got to get on the phone with him, take dictation.
Well,
right.
This was great.
Thank you, Mr. Paston. Hi, Mr. Kurtzel.
This is all well and good until I finish dictating, get downstairs. The bus is gone. The bus is leaving Springfield to go to Boston. We're overnighting in Boston and then flying to Halifax at like 6 a.m.
By the way, and let me explain this because some young people might be here. The dictation meant a phone attached to like a payphone. You couldn't take the phone with you. You couldn't dictate from the bus. People were saying, how do you miss the bus? Take the phone, get on the bus, and dictate on the phone.
No. We were dictating from a press box phone that was like a hardwired phone.
I can think of bad places to be stuck. Springfield, Massachusetts is not a good one.
Well, it was about a $68 cab ride to get to the hotel at Logan Airport.
Or again, 3 weeks pay.
Well, remember before when I said $75 for a night's work seemed like a lot? The looks on the faces when I turned in my expense report from this 10-day trip, and the first day I have a $68 cab ride. Boy, did I get my butt handed to me. But no, I mean, I I got to do cool things. I was telling a friend down here in Ocean City last night. I was 24 years old. I thought I knew everything. And I learned just how little I knew in the couple of years I worked there. But I learned. I mean, there were people around all the time, like Chris and Nussgart, Stan Rappaport, and Bernie,
Molly.
Molly, and people that just were giving of their time, that took their experience and just gave it to you and asked nothing in return except maybe to give that same experience to someone else down the road. And that became kind of in my career something that happened over and over again. It's one of the reasons I enjoyed working with young people up until the time I retired a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I heard from my eighth grade teacher about a week ago after I planned this gathering. By the way, if you're listening out, this is my Sports First News American sort of regathering. If you're watching, you're involved. Pete Kirchel is here, formerly of Masson. You know his work with the Orioles. Dave Smith is here, longtime editor at the Baltimore Sun and at the News American and at Sports First when we began. And Chris Zhang, also longtime News American, Evening Sun. There's a theme here that all of us had bylines in one or two or three papers along the way. And, I have Dan Shaughnessy on all the time and Clark Judge. And, there were so many legendary people that came through Baltimore. Peter Pasquarelli. We mentioned Bernie and all these people that we work with, but there was this whole Ken Rosenthal and Tim Kirchin and Richard Justice and just all these people that came through the Baltimore newspaper world that went on to do amazing things in baseball, football, sports in general. And Stedman kind of sat at the middle of all of it. Dave and Chris, I want to talk to you about this because there's a point for me where when somebody says to me, can you handle criticism? And I go through this with my wife, my son, my family, fans, listeners, whatever, and people being critical or being judgmental of your work. And I think to myself, I was 15 years old there trying to write stories, and I was 15 years old. Nothing was perfect. It was always a guy like Dave or a guy like Robbie or Bob Nussgard or Chris Sang, and every one of you. And I don't know why I didn't listen to the editors as much as the writers, because I sort of idolized the writers, John Hawkins and Bernie and Jeff, Mark Hyman, Bill Steck. I would talk to them about writing all the time. You guys were more mother hens in regard to like, which takes the comma? That doesn't. That's a rule. And here's the style book. And Dave, you were like an angry nun with a ruler slapping my finger saying, this is the right way to do this. And all of you were older than me. And as much as I probably would, however you remember me then, I respected the hell out of all of you, and I never argued a word. I had a thesaurus on my desk. I was always trying to pick a better word as a writer, but I think it allowed me to be shaped by all of you very early on. That's made me the stubborn old bastard I am in regard to what kind of journalist I'm going to be, how I'm going to be dealt with, how press conferences are going to go, what is truth, what is fact, what is fiction. And all that started, Dave, I'll give you the first love, and Chris, but both of you equally. I can't think one or the other. And Chris, you're with me maybe a little longer period of time as I got older, but foundationally, your ability to make me better is the reason they kept giving me gigs. It's the reason I didn't stop at one Geddy Lee interview and didn't write the next 600, or stop at one Skipjack story and they say, this kid can't do this. It was, this kid can do this. We got to help him get better. Dave, Chris, that was your life. And you were trying to make great writers better, let alone me at 16 or 17, make me 8 inches publishable on some little story,
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say, Nestor, is, boy, I had you fooled, because, now 40 years down the road, I'm thinking, here I was, a 22-year-old trying to sort of fake it and think that, I knew everything there was to know about editing. Whereas I was like, furiously trying to soak up everything I could from Chris Zhang and trying to figure it out. And, I wasn't just learning like the technical aspects from Chris. I was also learning bedside manner, how to talk to writers. It's a, as a writer, Nestor, you're vulnerable. You're putting yourself out there whenever you write. And,
What
you
has
know,
my
if you
name
have,
on it? That's what I would always say. It's got
right.
my
Yeah. Your
name
name's
on it.
on it.
If the coach lies to me, I can't just print that. It's got
Right.
my name on it, right?
Right. So, yeah. And so, what I learned over the years and what I probably didn't know, when I was just starting out was, you know, how do you talk to a writer, work with a writer, and not make them feel like, oh, I'm an idiot. How did I miss that? But make it like you're working with them, trying to make them look as good as possible. And that's one of the things I learned from Chris Sang and maybe some other guys at the News American too. I don't know if you remember a guy named Mark Zeider who he never really worked on the Sports First copy desk, but he worked on the News American copy desk. He was a really good editor, on the word side, and I learned a lot from him about editing, but also the people end of it. And so I think and people underestimate how important it is to just build relationships with people and get them to trust you. So that was part of my learning process too. I know you were 15 and you were like, you were listening to everybody and soaking everything in, but hey, true confession time. I was 22 years old. I was doing much of the same stuff you were, Nestor.
Dave, every morning I would get up and see the paper and see what you guys did at the time. How'd you F up my copy? Why did you rewrite that? Well, that,
Yeah,
that was it was perfect. They were my words.
yeah, yeah,
And I would see why you made the changes, and then someone rational and far more grown up like Jack Gibbons or Chris Zhang or Bob Paston or Mike Marlowe or Bob Nussgard, down the line. Kathy Frazier, throw her in. I want to give Chuck Rappaport some love because Chuck
yeah.
always beat my ass and made it right. Wenig, Cousins were early on. But Larry Harris, I'll throw him in. I'm just trying to think of all these people that would say, dude, I love you. And you wrote this is a really nice story. You did a great job. You had a great interview with this famous person. Which the comma's a witch and then you never forget that. Just basic rules and then style. And then more than
Yeah,
that, like structure and saying, they still say this to me. I can't imagine. You're a little long-winded. You're a little wordy.
yeah,
We could be a little more. We're a newspaper. Yeah, we're
yeah,
concise. It's not the internet. So I think there's a concise part that I have to beat into my brain in the modern era to say, don't bore us, get to the chorus. We ain't got all day, right? I mean, Chris,
right.
and that was your sort of gift is you got to write tighter, dude. I remember you telling me like, dude, it's a skipjack story. You're getting 12, 14 inches. Make it all good. We're not making it bigger. The hole's the hole. And the ad's the ad on page 8 where your skipjack story's going. You got to write this tight and be great at this. Or, we'll find somebody from Towson State or the University of Maryland Journalism School to, because there was always people ready to do these jobs. It was a fun job, but you needed to make sure I was good enough at it. And I appreciate that, Chris, all these years later.
Well, and you can say the aviation mechanism suffered from fuel starvation, or you can say the plane crashed. And in newspaper parlance, you want to say the plane crashed. When I was doing some public relations work for various places, sometime you do have to get into the gray area because I remember especially one, I was told by the president of a local hospital, make them think that we care what they think, but don't promise them anything because we're not changing anything. Okay, and that gets into a whole different thing. But what I loved about newspapers was if Cal Ripken was 3 for 4 or 0 for 4, we basically say what's happening with it. But I also like to play with words in that.
Look at steady. You got steady in. I got a steady story, but go ahead.
That's steady, and this is probably, I'm looking at it backwards, but a walk on the wild side, Orioles out of control and another losing effort. To me, what brought me the most joy was and I also thought this was a funny one because it's got a bowling story. It's got a bowling centerpiece, only in Baltimore, right? But I also had my share of mentors, and especially when Russ Brown first came in at the News American as sports editor, I would come in the morning and he'd have page proofs and there'd be red lines all over the place. And these are the 30 things you should have caught last night. And then and actually later on, a good lesson. I went to a basketball game at the old Civic Center, whatever it was called at the time. And they just before the halftime, they started having trouble with the big clock overhead. And so during halftime, they lowered this thing down. And on the side were all these like 8 to 10-year-old basketball players. And they were supposed to have a youth game at halftime. And because they had to fix the clock, the kids didn't get to play. And as a former kid that played on that basketball court and came off and walked alongside Wes Unseld when he was playing and things like that, I was really ticked off that the kids didn't get to play. So as a newspaper person, I went into the paper that night and said, I really have to write something about it. And I know this is a News American show, but this was a Marty Kaiser moment at the Sun. And Marty said, well, you've got to call the other side and find out what's going on. I said, yeah, but I saw it. I saw the kids on the side crying because they didn't get to play. He said, you have to call the other side and give the other side their chance to respond. And I called, and by then, Wes Unseld, the player, had become Wes Unseld, the general manager. And he said, yes, I know about it. Did you hear we're going to bus them out to Largo, to the Capitol Center? And rather than them playing during halftime of an exhibition game preseason, they're going to come out for a regular season game. And we've got them jackets, and we're going to take them out, and they've all got tickets, and they're all super excited about coming out. So that was what you're talking about, mentors. Okay, maybe me helping some people. Well, I had a lot of people helping me, and just Marty telling me, hey, you have to make that extra call just to let the other side have. I would have been wiping egg off my face if I had written a story. Big bad team doesn't let little kids play during halftime of a Bullets Wizards, whatever it was at the time, game. So I was happy to help you, but along the way, I wouldn't have had my career. I think News American once described me as the greenest copy editor they had. I was actually in the office of Steve O'Neill, the managing editor, for a job as like a copy boy, running coffee or doing stuff. And Bob Swan from the copy desk came in and said, someone's just leaving. And Steve turns to me and says, have you ever edited copy? And I said, yeah, I work for, school papers and stuff. He said, well, take the editing test. And if you pass the editing test, we'll talk about it. So I passed the editing test, and now here it's 40, 50 years later, and that's what my career was and still is. I'm still fixing up stories and making sure which has a comma and that doesn't, and whether underway is one or two words, those kinds of things.
Which one is it?
AP keep changing, I think. Dave, is it 2 now?
As far as I know, it was always 2. That's what you taught me.
Okay.
So here's what I would do in a case like that. I'd say, I don't freaking know, so I'll use in progress. Chris Zhang is here. Dave Smith is here. Pete Kurtzel is here. Rasig is at some music festival. We are discussing the late, great Sports First. Today is the 40th anniversary of the demise of a 1 year and 1 week old tabloid publication that was owned by the News American. So I have Steady here. This is a Terp Stage Miracle. This is after, it says page 11 at the top. That must be where my story was in it. This was after Sports First folded. This is November of 84. So 2 stories. One, my son was born on September 22nd, 1984. So happy 40th birthday to my son. How does that make you feel, Petey, that and Chris and Dave, that my son is 40?
I can remember the days leading up to your son's birth, and you were telling folks, I may be around in a couple of, I just don't know.
I tell Rasig all the time that I went into the office on September 23rd, the morning after my son was born. I was 15 years old and 10 months old. I went in, and Rasig was the only one. It was a Sunday, and I was writing, and I had to try to figure it out. But I had interviewed Kiss or a band at that time, and I needed to go in because there's no computer at home. I'm a 15-year-old kid. I had to go to the paper to write it. And I went and wrote this piece that I had interviewed. Maybe it might have been Rush, actually. I'm trying to think it was. And I went in on a Sunday to write. And I was the only one in the newsroom. And Rasig came over to me and I said, hey, Rasig, my girlfriend had the baby. We're going to name him Barry. And like, first off, people couldn't believe that a kid. Like, that's all obvious. But Rasig's like, you do know the newspaper went out of business yesterday, right? And I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. Dude, I didn't even understand what that meant at 15. You know what I mean? I had been there 9 months. I'm a kid. I'm 15 years old. Didn't understand any of that. And what happened was, and some of you would know this, is a lot of you lost jobs. And I was the kid making $3.33 an hour, like you, Petey, $50 for the game. It got me more work. I went from nothing to 30 hours a week. Can you split half school time? And Dave Smith was my mentor in that case, my big brother who had to sign all of my grade stuff for my teacher my senior year of high school, which is what this was. So this thing was steady. I got to tell a steady story, Zanger, and Dave, you'll love this too, because it's an editing thing. I'll never forget. It was an area we called the bullpen. Do you remember that? The area where John Stedman was the bullpen. And if Boyers were here, he would tell us what it was before it was the bullpen. But it was, John had an office in this area that you had to walk down this long tunnel. It had a fountain outside. It had a window. And the SIG of John Stedman on the phone, that's on purpose because John was always on the phone. Whenever you went in there, sometimes his feet were up on the desk. Sometimes it, weren't. But like John was always on the phone.
I think though, the funny thing at the time was, all the writers, I mean, Pasquarelli, Richard Kuckner, whoever, all of the ones that had the pictures in were talking on the phone. So Marlowe one day drew a line connecting all the phones of the columnists all talking on the phone.
To each other. Yeah, that's a great graphic. So Steady pulls me in one night, and I'm young and impressionable. And I think I had written something, and I'd ask him if, or whatever. He didn't edit my stuff, but I admire, anybody knows me, knows how much I love John. I'll give you guys a chance to talk about John if you want. But here's my John story. He comes in, eyebrows all up. He says to me, and Chris, give me that line again about shortening with your stock speech about what.
Aviation mechanism suffering from fuel starvation versus the plane crashed.
I had written something that someone perished or passed away, probably passed away, because in my neighborhood, you said, oh, Miss Lois passed away. He looked at me, eyebrows up. He said, Senor, they don't perish. They don't pass away. They die. They die. And I'm like, die's 3 letters. Pass away's like 7 and 2 words in a space. Like, Dave, finding the right word matters, right, Mr. Editor?
Yeah, it really does. And when Chris talks about being called into meetings and saying, hey, you missed this, you missed that, it reminds me of a sports first story that involves Paston. I think at one point during that 1 year that we were in existence, I think the Colts played the Broncos, and it was a big game. John Elway was playing them, and I think the Colts had a lead, and the Broncos came back to beat them. And I happened to be the guy who was looking at the story. I had the chance to write the headline, and I wrote a headline that did not please my boss, Bob Paston. It was something along the lines of like, belated Bronco salvo stuns Colts or something like that. And that headline, not only did he not like it, but it was bad enough that he felt the need to call a staff meeting with the copy desk, in which he held up that headline, my headline, and said, we don't want to write headlines like this. And
No, he didn't say that at all. He cursed every other word, right?
he probably did.
I
I'm
fucking
trying to
headline.
clean it up for the audience.
I can hear him right now. When I think of Paston, I think of the F-bomb flying out of him. It's
Yeah.
hilarious.
Oh yeah,
And he
absolutely.
loved
And
me. He loved
yeah,
me.
probably a couple of F-bombs did fly out. But I was sitting in the back of the room when we had that meeting, and my face was growing redder and redder. And I was so embarrassed. But you talk about learning how to take criticism. Well, yeah, that was one of my early lessons in how to take criticism. That's for sure.
All right, I put this picture up because Dave's friggin' camera's not working if you're watching out on the Zoom. Chris Zhang is here. The great Pete Kurtzel is here. Dave Smith is here. We had Gene Boyers earlier. I'm going to sort of wrap it up with this because you guys, you got things to do, and it is the 40th anniversary of some of us losing our jobs and some of us getting great opportunities. But this picture was a goodbye picture for Bob Paston. Is that correct, Chris? I think as you know it to be.
Yes, we had done it and that was when we had moved to the back of the building at that time. So
by the way, that's the only way I knew you. When I came in January of 84, my first day was like January 11th of 1984. I walked in and this was the room, and it was a commissary, right? Like, but this is the room I remember, in the closet over Petro's head. I remember all of it because when I came in, you know what my job was? Paston came in, it probably was Stan Rapport, said, "You got to clean this up. This is your job. You clean this up." And I'm like, so I cleaned it all up. I mean, I spent weeks cleaning that place up. It was an S-hole, honestly, really.
The sports department used to be in the cafeteria. So we had but the sports department also was kind of and especially with Sports First was, well, even before Sports First was always a joyous. I mean, when Stedman would have his, the people come in off the street just to talk to John, the news side kind of wanted the sports department to be off on its own because we were a bunch of characters and weren't necessarily very quiet or anything like that. So
toy department.
Yes, definitely.
The Island of Misfit Toys.
Yeah. There's one story before we go, Nestor, the Sports First. Bob Paston basically, as executive sports editor of the News American, concentrated most of his efforts once Sports First started on Sports First. And I was assistant sports editor, and he said, "Chris, take care of the day by day of the News American because I'm concentrating on Sports First." And one of the problems we had, as Gene Boyers mentioned earlier, with it having to go to Gaithersburg to be printed, was the whole idea, and this was before ESPN, this was before
USA Today.
USA Today. I mean, we were looking to get in on the sports market, the morning sports market, because at the time the Baltimore Sun was doing some kind of bland coverage at the time. And I can say that because I later became a Sun person. But anyway, one of the problems, however, was, so the idea was to get it in the boxes at the convenience stores by like 6 or 7 in the morning so that people could grab it, go into work and have it on the bus, or grab it when they grab their morning coffee and have it for the day, because they couldn't get the News American until the afternoon. So this was a way to grab the sports market.
This was the News American's morning paper.
Correct. So the problem was, however, because of Gaithersburg and because of problems with transportation, half the time it was getting into the stores after the News American. So it was, we weren't able to grab the market, and they were complaining that the sales weren't up. Well, the sales weren't up because it wasn't in the damn stores at 7 in the morning like it should have been. So I, as assistant sports editor, wrote a letter to publisher Sparby and said that these are the problems we're having, and we really need to get this in the stores earlier. There's a transportation problem. Several days later in the inter-office mail, I open up something, and it's a application to join the News American transportation fleet. They wanted me to leave as assistant sports editor and become one of their truck drivers, that if I was going to complain about their performance,
their union,
that if Chris really has a problem with it, he can start driving one of the trucks. Basically, was what he said.
Well, I
So
want to leave with this because I want to identify all these people, and if you have something to say, this is I'm not in this picture, by the way. I wasn't there when it was taken. I mean, I was just in, but I mean, I was working 3, 4, 5 nights a week. I mean, I was there a lot, in 1984. I mean, once I started, but the sports first folded in September, and that's when I really started to work a lot the next year and a half before I went to the Sun in 1986. So left to right, let's go through these because I don't know that I know everyone, right? Pete Kurtzel is on the far upper left. There's a
Yep.
man with a beard next to him. Who was that?
Al
Alan
Simon,
Who is next to him?
John Banks,
John Banks.
Stan Rappaport, Barry Levine,
Barry Levine. Yeah.
Bernie Miklasz, Ed Dentry.
Yep.
Above Ed Dentry, who is that?
That's
That was
Mark
the-
Snyder.
That was
Mark-
Mark Snyder that we referenced earlier. Yeah.
Okay, and that's
Yes.
Bob Clark.
Yep.
And then top throw back is Tom Cousins.
Yep.
Underneath of him that's O'Neill, right? John O'Neill.
John O'Neill.
I think we just lost John in recent times as well.
Yeah, we
Below John O'Neill is Chuck Rappaport, who I mentioned, sitting next to the only female in the picture, Kathy Frazier. And then above Chuck Rappaport is the great Charlie Lamb, who was our longtime horse racing analyst, who was a wonderful man. And to his right, standing off alone, is the great late Rich Petro of Dundalk, Maryland, my horse racing buddy and computer consultant to everyone. Beneath him is John Stedman. Beneath John Stedman to the right is Rick Ratarchik. Is that correct, guys?
Right.
Yep.
And Rick helped us with horse racing also.
I remember that. And next
He
to
did.
him, next to John Stedman, is my dear friend and was a man who went on to he's in Hall of Fame. Dick Girardi, who calls Penn State football. He's a recurring figure in my life and on my show, and is a horse racing analyst. Next to him is Chris Zhang, who is with us. You still look the same, Zanger, to me. You're still tall, right?
Still tall, a little bit wider now.
Below Chris Zhang is Lou Cortina, who is in New Jersey with his Italian family and couldn't be with us today, but is still alive and well. To Chris's right, to the left of the photo, in the beard and the fro, is the great Ron Wenig, who is now sunning himself from upstate New York all the way to Sacramento and now in San Diego, sunning himself in I believe he's in real estate retirement in the lower center. Jeff Gordon is above him. By the way, I love that Wenig's the guy with his mouth open because it's such personality of who Ron was in 1984. Above that is Jeff Gordon. And Dave Smith is above him. Dave, is there anything you want to say about Jeff Gordon and about Bernie Miklasz and Dick Girardi and some of these folks that went on in our industry to really do some amazing things? And Mark Hyman, by the way, next to Jeff Gordon, who now runs the University of Maryland, the Merrill School of Journalism down there. But just some great, great writers that were born out of this picture.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I loved editing all of those guys, and Mark, Jeff, Bernie. I mean, reading guys like that really was like a graduate course in Baltimore sports. And Bernie, I really liked Bernie when he became a columnist, and he I thought he really had his finger on the pulse of things, and I was real sad to see him go. But he's gone on to do great things. And Mark, of course, went on to a great career at the Sun, and also helped John Miller, the Orioles broadcaster, write his book back in the '90s, Confessions of a Baseball Purist. So it was just a treat to be able to help these guys, look good, put their best face out there, in the newspaper, make sure their bylines were, something they could be proud of, what was under their byline.
I think the only person in this picture, there are two people in this picture, well, three actually, and they're all about to be identified. So Jeff Gordon is the blonde in the middle. Above him in the glasses, in sort of the middle of the middle, is Dave Smith, whose voice you just heard here. Mark Hyman is below Dave. Behind Mark Hyman is Bob Nussgart with the mustache, the Columbus, Ohio sensation, who went on to be my boss at the Evening Sun, and the guy who, and I should tell you guys this while my face showing, because I hid out in the morgue, which was in the hallway behind John Stedman's office, which was called the library, but we called it the morgue. It's where all the old newspapers were, the microfiche. Anytime we needed to do research, but it was called the morgue. Even though and Stedman would say they die, they don't pass away, they die. I went in, I snuck into the morgue, and there were a couple of phones in there in the middle of the night. And I called up to the newspaper at 11 o'clock at night one night, and I'm like, Nuss, you got to get me out of here. You got to get me a job. You got to get me a job. This place is going out of business. This ship is sinking, whatever. And my phone rang, and Jack Gibbons and Bob Nussgart and a guy named Mike Marlowe, who was only a legend to me, met me at Christmas time in 1985 and gave me a job at the Sun that really begat everything that I've done in my career. None of this happens without the guy in the front. So I'm going to get to him in a minute. Fellas, who is the gentleman here next to Bob Nussgart? I vaguely remember him.
That's Joe Serrera, and I have to tell a quick story. When they were hiring for Sports First, Joe was a copy editor like I was. I chose to start on June 13th. Joe chose to start on June 20th, 1983. When Sports First folded and they had to lay off certain people and they kept certain people to work on the News American, that's the only reason I kept a job. I stayed on with the News American. The cut line fell at Joe Serrera. He ended up getting laid off because he started 1 week later than I did. And then a few years later, when the News American was getting ready to fold, Joe helped me get a job where he was working at the Bergen Record. So shout out to Joe Serrera. He's a great guy.
I remember I remember Joe now. There's a few people missing here. A guy named Al Piccinini, Chris Pica, who's my dear friend. I'm missing in this picture. John Hawkins is missing. Must have been a Blast game because he was covering the Blast then. I don't know if anybody else is missing, but below Joe Serrera to the lower left corner with the hat, the only guy with the hat, the man in the hat, his work is Mike Resigliano, who's my dear friend. And then below him is the guy who's really responsible for all of it. And Dave, I know you couldn't get your camera to work, but you have this shirt, this yellow shirt that was the Sports First logo, where the I in Sports First was a 1. Yep. And that is Tom Robinson, better known as Robbie. He went on to become the editor of the Scranton newspaper. He's from Binghamton, New York. He's a lifer friend of mine, and wanted to join us today and couldn't join us today. And I remember attending his wedding as a young man, but he was the first person I met. He was my boss, and I think he was 19 years old and I was 15. Pete, when I got dragged up into the press box in 1984, he was dragged with him when I met you. It was with him with the Death Dogs up in the Baltimore Civic Center on the roof on the west side of the arena. And, so, he brought me in on all of this, and 40 years later, today, it all sort of fell apart, and we've all gone on to do these amazing things. But I wanted to tell these stories because Nussgart finally came on my 25th anniversary last summer at Costas and did an hour just telling old stories. Sig and I, he's on the show all the time. We rarely tell a lot of old war stories. And then Tom Robinson has come on my 10th anniversary, 15th, 2020, every year, every 5 years, he'll come on and tell some old stories because I am so proud of everything of my own work, but my relationships with people like you. And when people ask me how this thing survived all these years, you guys just all of you and the people that are departed and people no longer with us that couldn't join us. I'm indebted to all of you, especially for the hour you've given me here today. I appreciate it.
Hey, glad to do it, Ness.
Absolutely.
Zanger, when are we playing hoops?
Hoops? Well, how about tennis?
Are you playing pickleball?
No, refuse to play pickleball.
Good for you. Good for you. Pete Kurtzel, Dave Smith, Chris Zhang, true mentors and good people, good men, and shaped me and molded me when all I had was a Roget Thesaurus. Which takes the comma? That doesn't. They don't pass away. They're not deceased. They die.
Do you know Roget's first name?
Monsieur.
Peter.
Peter Roget. Okay.
Peter Roget. There's your trivia for the day.
Peter, Paul, and Mary. Pete Kurtzel, Dave Smith, Chris Zhang, Gene Boyers, who was here, and for everybody else that ever worked at the great Sports First newspaper. This might be the only requiem that's ever done in the history of 40 years to the day that we all lost gigs and Baltimore lost the newspaper and also lost the football team that year. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. I appreciate y'all listening to the old journalist and sports writer and editor war stories. Back for more Baltimore Positive right after this.